Hello and welcome to Piece of Pod, a podcast brought to you by South Coast law firm Warner Goodman. I'm Sarah Whitemore. I'm an employment lawyer and senior partner in the firm with over 30 years of experience. In this podcast, I'll be having conversations with law firm partners, business owners, clients and other contacts of mine, and we'll be engaging in conversations about running businesses, career journeys, and how to excel in the world of work. So if that's of interest, why not grab yourself a cuppa, get yourself comfortable, and let's dive in. My guest today is, I believe, the biggest fan of our podcast. Director of People Strategy at an exciting gaming brand. He's previously worked as an events manager, an area manager, a general manager. He's worked in corporate property and in events management and so on, a variety of organisations. So I'm excited to explore all of that and more from the world of work. So my guest today is Darren Hughes. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I will have to shamelessly plug Warner Goodman on endless occasions after telling you how wonderful the service is. And also, telling you that I am the biggest fan, which I now regret.
Well, first things first. Normally, I start by asking people about their career journey and where they started. But as you are our number one fan, what is it about the podcast that resonates with you?
I think, and this is part of the Warner Goodman service that we've had with Peace of Mind throughout the years. I've always been very grateful to Warner Goodman. I came from an operational background where I didn't have really anyone else as a mentor or anything else. So Warner Goodman's been instrumental in taking me through that journey as I've kind of transitioned and done that. So that's the first thing. But as we kind of continue and we've got to the stage where we are now with the podcast and everything else, it kind of enhances that package for me, because you work in a bit of a silo sometimes. You work in sort of isolation. You don't have the opportunity to bounce ideas off of, and that's where I've used Warner Goodman over the years anyway, and it's just nice to be able to do that in my own time at sort of 7 when you're travelling into the office without having to pick the phone up and disturb your breakfast. So
perfect.
No, it's very helpful.
Well, I hope you enjoy listening to this podcast back when the moment comes.
I definitely will not. That's fine, thank you.
So having said that, we will start in the usual way at the very beginning. So tell me a bit about your career journey. What was your first job?
I think they all start out sort of 14, 15, 16. I was quite an avid basketball player back in the day. Probably put on a bit too much weight now, but you never know, never say never. But into some coaching, into some sort of community stuff, and that's really sort of where I sort of took my first sort of part-time roles. The first proper job I got into was behind the bar, working in an event centre. I did that the day after I was 18. Tried to do that without a hangover, but that was probably difficult. But no, I mean, I worked there for about a year, and then as part of the group, it was part of the Virgin group. I then went into as a duty manager for Virgin Active because I knew a previous manager that had worked there. And then I came back shortly after into events. I think at 19, I was an events manager. So again, no experience, completely clueless, and then just trying to piece everything together on a day-by-day basis. But yeah, that was incredibly rewarding, and I think I took a lot of experience from that. That's where it started.
And events management, that's not really necessarily something that you can learn, I'm sure there are degrees in events management, but learning on the job, there are probably lots of things that you learn through that time that perhaps have helped you with later roles. What would you say you've taken from that role? Yeah,
I think for me it's a case where you're exactly right, and it was quite strange. I had a girlfriend at the time that was studying events management in university, and again the comparables were few and far between. Sorry, you learn so much doing things proactively, engaging with people, and I think there's a psychological aspect that kind of relates to HR in that sense, where understanding people, nuances, expectations from you, not just in business, but in people in general. And that's the biggest thing, because in events, effectively, what you're trying to do is you're trying to fulfill somebody's wishes, ambitions, and a picture in their head. Everyone's always got the sort of the quintessential sort of bridezilla kind of conversation in events management, but it's not really the case. But what you are doing is you're managing someone's event. It's incredibly important to them. They put a lot of work in, a lot of time, and you're trying to provide that and to fulfill that to the end. But your key goal in that is to ensure that that person specifically is happy. Yes, you have business reputation with everyone else attending, but that is, at 19 years old, it's a massive kind of boon to take, and you don't realise you're learning these things, and they just happen organically. But yeah, a huge benefit early on in a career, definitely.
And we do a lot of events, as you well know. We do our employment law conferences and our Peace of Mind members events and our masterclasses and so on.
Yeah.
Are there any sort of top tips that you think you would give us in terms of presenting those or producing those?
I'm going to sound like a number one fan again, but I think, but for me, I said it was so important to me because I think I kind of stumbled upon this in a previous role. But as I said, when I transitioned from operations into a HR environment, I kind of knew nothing with that, and all the support and the facilities with it are hugely impactful. Anyone for working in an SME environment, anyone starting out or with a small team, it's hard sometimes because you don't have that mentorship necessarily in that capacity. You do in wider business, but you kind of feel very isolated in that sense. And so to be able to pick up the phone or to be able to have all of these provisions available at your fingertips to continue to enhance your knowledge, in pending legislation in terms of employment law or anything along those lines, it's just helpful to stay in touch with it. And for a lot of people, if you've got a 2-hour commute or something into London, then it's something that's really useful and convenient for you as well. So yeah.
And we're looking now at some of our events and video recording them and so on, so that people can access them, because our client base post-COVID has gone quite distant from the office. We used to just be South Coast law firm looking after people in Southampton, Fareham and Portsmouth, but now all across the country, and it's hard for people to get to our events in person, but having that kind of video accessibility, it can be viewed in their own time, as you say. So after your role at Virgin, then you went into the gaming sector.
Yep.
So what was your journey from events to gaming? How did that come about?
Yeah, I think a number of people, when you go through a career path, some things that you actively work towards and some things just find you, or that you fall in the lap of it. For me, I'd finished that. I knew I wanted to go travelling. I was still quite young. I think I was 22 at the time. I had an opportunity to do that. So I left on great terms. Still speak to my old line manager from then even now. But yeah, did those things, went travelling, took that experience, took that opportunity in my career, knowing that I wanted to do something else, not knowing what I wanted to do, but took that opportunity nonetheless, and then came back, was applying for jobs as most people do, sort of scattergunning things that now don't do you any favours, but in hindsight, with a bit of maturity, and fell in the lap and got a phone call one day to do this. It was quite coy in regards to what it was, where it was at. And I use that experience now all the time. I remember when I went for my initial interview, I nearly declined the second interview on the basis of the industry, what it was in, the stigma that goes along with it. But I remember going into that second interview with immaculately presented people, smarter than I'm dressed today. And it was really impressive just in regards to the professionalism that was in there, thinking that it would be some underhand operation or something like that, where you kind of take the stigma with it. It was completely the opposite. It's completely professional, completely well organised. I was very, very impressed with it. And as I said, I nearly didn't go. And I use that now in terms of recruitment, in terms of where we're at, to make sure that we can facilitate that same understanding and acknowledgement when we're doing recruitment for our industry as well.
And it's fascinating stuff, isn't it? Because quite often businesses fall into the trap of thinking that they are looking for the ideal candidate and forget the fact that the candidate's also looking for the ideal employer, and that it's as much a sales process of the business as it is a recruitment process.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been a kind of a fascinating combination of my previous role, where I was working in commercial real estate in central London. It was a sort of 5-star hospitality. We had an operation in Park Lane. It was a world away, and you could really sort of sell that business, and it was the opposite effect. You had people, clamouring from your social media content and the image that you portrayed to work there, and it worked so well for you in that sense of being able to articulate the business in a way that was beneficial to people coming in or looking for jobs. And then you transition into an industry which has a bad reputation, historically, unwanted, but I completely understand where it is with the media and everything else. But then trying to have that secondary challenge where you don't get the benefit from it, but you're actually having to challenge some of the stereotypes that go with it. So for us, we work in a very heavily regulated industry. There's huge support functions in place, and I think that the combinations between potentially what is happening online to what happens on a high street, with people observing you, facilitating, providing all the compliance, the customer care, the safer gambling materials. It's a world away, and I think as soon as people understand that from a recruitment perspective, it becomes very easy. But we have, and my team has, a huge obligation to portray that and to make sure that that's one of the first things that we acknowledge straight off the bat. So, the contrast of those two roles is very interesting and has kind of continue to let me develop that over time in terms of the strategies for it.
And I think recruitment is going to be one of the real keys to preparing for and responding to the Employment Rights Bill. On one of our podcasts recently, Kath Dixon and I were talking about the Employment Rights Bill and the fact that we're going to have people who are protected from day one with unfair dismissal rights. That might not come for another couple of years, but we need to make sure that we're taking steps now to get businesses ready so that they've got the right people in their businesses, so that the need for dismissals is reduced in that respect. And recruitment is one of the real keys to getting the right people and making sure that we avoid having to deal with dismissals. Yeah. So are there any sort of top tips you've kind of gathered along your way in terms of recruitment? Anything that works particularly well from your perspective?
I mean, I think I've taken an active role to do that across all the businesses that I've worked for, and previously that was actually the business model for expanding the HR department. In that business, we had a £200,000 recruitment fee for the last year with a business with 90 employees, which is madness. Okay. So just trying to take that and then use that to facilitate a team and do that in-house. So during that time period, I've spoken to 1,000 people by now easily. And I think the number one thing is transparency. You develop ways of conversations and you understand what most people want to know without them asking for it. So just trying to level with people, but really that transparency and honesty in regards to it. Everyone's been in enough interviews where they've been missold or someone's tried to misrepresent the business, and you know that that's nowhere near the reality of what you're going to walk into. And all you do in that situation, in my opinion, is you damage yourself. Because people are then going to experience a culture or a way of working that they were never told they didn't want or didn't experience it, and then you're flipping the coin with whether they're going to accept that or not. If you work in a hard industry, always be honest in regards to that. There are always negatives and positives, but in my experience, people will always relate to the fact that you've been honest and you've given them a fair appraisal, and that builds a rapport, because that person isn't just trying to join a business. They don't know the business. At that point, they know you and only you, and anyone else they've met. So that honesty and transparency at the start is what they're going to latch onto, and otherwise you'll lose the candidate. And
I think it's a similar sort of thing is when you're looking at candidates. I was talking some time ago with a chap who worked at Metro Bank. And Metro Bank is led by an American guy, came over to the UK, and one of his mantras is, if I get this right, recruit for attitude, train for skills. Yeah. So looking at your candidate just from the perspective of how are they coming across as an individual, rather than do they actually know what they need to do the job? Because I can probably teach them to do the job, but what I can't teach them is the attitude towards work and the hunger and drive and so on that we're looking for the next generation.
Yeah, that's really hard to actually ascertain as well. I mean, I think a number of people are fixated on trying to get recruitment perfect. So you'll always hire the best candidate, always. Even if you refine your processes and everything is down to a fine art, and it's almost like an orchestrated performance on both sides, the reality is that a skilled candidate will be able to present what they want to present in the same way that you'll be able to present the business in the way that you want to present it. There's always a 3-month time period in which the honeymoon period is over, and then you finalise and you understand what that person will be like in the future, but completely agree that the soft skills in that are so important. And everyone talks about culture as buzzwords or anything else, but that mentality, that fit, working in business that have been geared to growth, takes a specific kind of person that is normally, ambitious, wants to grow with the business, wants to be a part of that. And when the business hopefully succeeds in the future, they want to be there, to put their name on the fact that they've helped drive that from the front. And been very fortunate over the years to find those people, to still work with those people now. In my current role, the first 3 or 4 venue managers or general managers that I hired are still with us, and every single one of them has been promoted in the business, and that's really nice to see. You don't always get it right, and I think it's the acceptance that recruitment can be improved from a percentage outcome, but you can never avoid the fact that there will be people that come in that won't be a right fit for the business. And the last thing on that for me is, I always respect the fact that that's going to happen. I've worked in jobs, and we've all been in business and industry where that hasn't worked out, and it becomes very combative. It becomes a point where it's the employee has failed you, and I think that's completely incorrect. You've asked something from the employee, and that employee has tried in nearly all cases. And if it hasn't worked out, it doesn't need to be combative. I've helped lots of people that have told me, Darren, look, I appreciate the opportunity, I really do, but it's not right for me. They've come into that meeting with a lot of anticipation. They feel like they've let you down, guilt. And the reality, there is none. I appreciate the openness, I appreciate the honesty, and I've actually even helped those people go on to find jobs and write references for them even so. And I think that's the way it should be. And I always believe those things will come back in that everyone you meet, you'll meet again. And I think that's important.
And sometimes those people, if you let them go in a well-managed way with dignity, respect and so on, and another opportunity arises in your business, they come back to your business as well, and they perhaps were a square peg in a round hole type of thing, and suddenly they're a square peg in a square hole, and they excel. So
that's literally, that's the conversation I've had with a number of candidates. I'd say exactly that. Is I have a sort of no square pegs in round holes policy. And just because that doesn't fit, that doesn't mean that you aren't suitable for something else. Also to the fact that there's a number of people that have applied for operational roles and they've actually come to work for us in head office capacities and departmental functions because they clearly have a skill set geared to something else. And I've recently just had a hire actually that had applied for a general manager role. She's come to work for me in HR. And the skill set is clearly there, but never identified, never tapped into, and never mentored or told that was the way it is. She's constantly intelligent. She's got great emotional intelligence, and she's like a duck in water now already. And it's great to see that, but it's also slightly discerning that there's so many people out there that have got that opportunity, just waiting for someone to give them a fair shot.
Which kind of brings us back to your career journey, because we were talking about Virgin Active and then the gaming sector, and those were operational roles. You were in area manager roles and that sort of thing, but you're not in operations now. So how did that journey continue?
Quite swiftly. So when I left the gaming industry originally, I went into commercial real estate and serviced offices in central London, as I said. During that conversation was very interesting. It was a very eclectic business. It was very sort of erratic, some fantastic people and some of the best people I've ever worked with there, but in a really high-paced environment with lots going on and lots of change and change management. I went for my interview and very weirdly I got to a point where I went for a general manager role because I was happy to take a step back, new industry, I had to learn everything again. I wasn't trying to overinflate the opportunity there. At that interview, the CEO turned around to me and said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to offer you the general manager role. So I said, okay, no, I completely respect that. He goes, I want you to be the operations manager. You'll be bored. Because I'd run 12, 15 venues, I'd worked halfway across the country, I'd had a skill set to manage something on an area basis. And that was really flattering. He saw something in me to give me that opportunity. And then he said, but also, the operations director is going on maternity in 3 months' time, so then you're going to do that.
Okay, so there's a career path that's rapidly... Yeah.
So I think I clarified at the end of that meeting. I said, so you didn't take me as a general manager, but you've offered me 2 promotions in an interview. Yeah. And he said, exactly right. Yeah. We'll see you in a month. So that was that, which was very strange. When I went into that business, it was very, very strange. They had a great people, some great initial culture, but that business had grown so rapidly that culture wasn't experienced every day. And there had been a disconcert between where it should be and where the practicality ended up being from the growth and from the fact that they'd lost personal connection, lost touches. But the expectation from the staff was still based on that culture that existed previously. I remember I went into the business and within the first week I had 4 people break down and cry to me.
Oh gosh.
Which is
not what you're looking for in a job.
No, but I said at the time I was not in a HR capacity in any way, shape or form. But I spent the next 3 months just doing HR role, and employee relations and everything that I'd not really assigned to in my head in terms of that. And then again, I sat down with him after that time period, and he said, "Look, I appreciate everything you've done. We did some great things. We put out an anonymous survey, which everyone always presumes is not anonymous, so you always have to take that into consideration. And there was one scenario which was really compelling. There was an amazing member of staff who had dyslexia, clear dyslexia. And even though it was anonymous, her comments came up on the presentation when I gave that. And he knew immediately. And he was not an emotional sort at all. And I saw a tear roll down his eye.
Okay.
And he just sat back in his chair, and it was like his whole world had sort of crumbled. And it wasn't nice to see, but the realisation of what happened in that moment then changed the trajectory from there, for the next, year or two of the business easily. And probably off the back of that meeting, we had another sit down, and he said, Dan, I appreciate, I've taken a chance, I've given you this operational role and you've filled in for the operations director, but unfortunately it's not a right fit. And I said, look, I appreciate that entirely. I really appreciate the opportunity. And he said, no, Darren, you misunderstand me.
You were looking for your P45 and the envelope and off you go.
Absolutely. And instead he slid across a business card with HR director on it. And said, I'm not going to force you, but you have 24 hours.
Okay.
So
make your mind up.
Yeah, and he did things in a way that was very kind of supportive, but not in a traditional sense. He would do things that he felt was right and give you the opportunities. And from there was kickback. There was some of the senior team and some of the board members didn't see the benefit in any way, shape or form. I think they had 75, 80 employees at the time. They'd never dealt with it before. But all of these issues, even with that coming to light, even with those things being resolved and doing some great work, there was a lot of hesitancy and reluctance. But at that point, we then had me and only me. I started working with Warner Goodman at that point. As I said, standalone role, needed so much help in regards to handbook, contract generation, individual circumstances, instances, advice and guidance. And by the time I left a year later, I hadn't planned to leave, but by the time I left a year later, I had 4 people in the department.
Yeah.
And so that understanding of each and every day what the benefit was to continue to be able to grow the team, to go from that level of reluctance and hesitancy to be able to introduce HR in a generic sense, to then understanding it's an integral part of the business was really, really eye-opening and rewarding in that sense.
And so the CEO had seen something in you that he thought, you've got people skills, you're going to be good in this HR position. When you look at the operations roles that you undertook previously, can you see that in yourself as well? Were there things that you learned as part of the operations roles that you took through to HR? Yeah,
it's a great question. I mean, absolutely. Not at the time. And this was the really interesting thing. I was an area manager. I'd had sort of normally 10 to 12 venues, but up to sort of 20, 25. And I didn't realise at the time that 60% of my role was HR. I had no understanding, because every business is built differently and you assume that every business is the same. You work in isolation, you just assume that that's the way it is. The reality was it wasn't. And I think there were some things in there that were inherently sort of broken. I deal with a grievance every month. And you assume that that's normal. So you're in a position where you assume that that's just part of the business model, how it's supposed to be, and that's the world we live in. I haven't had a formal grievance in 4 years.
Right.
Since I left.
Yeah.
And it's that starts to open your eyes with it. But I was doing endless investigations, disciplinaries. I carried over the 2P process as an area manager in a business. And you think that's normal, but it's not. And that was really nice to kind of look back on now and realise that's where it started.
Yeah. And so you then went from this commercial real estate business back into gaming, but continuing in the route along the HR route, and your role in the gaming business then was what job title? Yeah, so I mean, I came in, it was an overly fluffy title, which still exists today, which is Director of People Strategy. The reason is that there was going to be a lot of crossover with operations and HR, and I learned from my previous business the worst job title you can have is HR and Operations Director, because the number one person that people have issues with or may have problems with is the Operations Director, and if you are in fact the same person, you've got a cultural problem straight away. So I tried to avoid that. I came in a more generalised role to advise on the business. The business had been set up for a couple of years, but there was, I think, a sort of a lack of industry experience in that. And that's where I wasn't looking for a change, but the sales pitch from the owner at the time was very convincing. Why would you throw away 10 years of experience, and why wouldn't you take a job that can combine everything you've done so far into one role? I didn't have a good answer for that, so I joined. And then again, continued to grow that business. I started off in a generalised role. We brought in a COO of the business who I'd worked with previously. You have to be very open in this sense. I always say it was quite an interesting piece. As area managers, we worked together at the time in the previous business. I always say I was a good area manager. I was good in an operational role. A couple of years I came second in the business. Okay. Out of 31 area managers. Sounds pretty good.
But I brought in the person that came first.
Okay.
So that's just the acknowledgement in terms of, there has to be a level of vulnerability, I think, in terms of either recruitment or bringing people into the business. They're not there to step on your toes. If you can enhance the business in any way you can, you take it. And he's been a huge asset, and his work ethic is unprecedented. So to be able to do that, to be able to bring those people in and grow the business, which then allowed me to step back into a HR function again in its entirety. And again, then build my team from there. So started off in a standalone role, now have 4 people in the department. And each time you're kind of challenging the what can you bring, what can you benefit, and how can you detail this to the business. But the reality is that HR can be everything. It depends how much. It normally doesn't interject into operations as much as we do. But we will do training. We will hire teams of whole new venues for new openings. We will. I do the one-to-ones with the managers. Mm-hmm. I'm not their line manager, but that's my role in the business. So it's a very different kind of setup, and people will be probably looking to say it's incredibly heavy-handed to have 4 people in HR for a 200-people business. But yeah, we actively get involved, very much into the operational side as well.
And it's interesting actually thinking about job titles within HR, because I'm long enough in the tooth to remember that there used to be personnel departments. Yep. And then gradually personnel departments became human resources, mm-hmm. or we then just reduced it to HR. But now we're much more seeing director of people. Yeah. Director of people and culture is quite a common one. Mm-hmm. Director of people and strategy is quite a common one. Mm-hmm. And do you think the changing titles that we've got reflects a change in business attitudes towards the role and the value of that role?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think people is just such a broad spectrum, but it enhances so much. And I think that's where, from my perspective, that job title, and it worked for me in the sense of trying to explain what you do. We say it's a bit fluffy, but if you want to build a business for growth, the only way to do it is to ensure that you have the people, and planning that out 1, 2, 3 years in advance. You need to know where you're going to be. You need to know where those people are going to be able to provide to the business, what you can give to them, and how that synergy works with a growing business. You need all the other facilities and everything else involved as well, but you genuinely can't do that without people leading your teams. The most important role in our business is our general managers. They're the point in which everything comes together. They're dealing with their teams on a daily basis. They have to deal with instruction from HQ and the senior team, and they have to deliver those. So hugely important. And I spent the first 6 months of this job just relentlessly on my own, hiring those general managers. And it's incredibly rewarding for me to see that, I think the first 4 I ever hired are still in the business. Yes. And continue to grow, and they've all been promoted internally. And that's part of that. Some of that's fortunate. But also, I think it sort of speaks to the fact that we've really invested in that as much as we can, because we know that we will be stunted in our growth if we don't have that.
And it's very, very rewarding, isn't it? As I say, I've been with Warner Goodman for 30 odd years. I started out as a trainee solicitor, so someone invested in me, and then I've come up through the ranks and now obviously senior partner. But I can't think of anything more rewarding than taking other people on that journey. And we have quite a lot of people in what we call WG Academy. Mm-hmm. So instead of having trainee solicitors now, we have people who are doing various different qualifications, and seeing them progress and develop and come through the ranks. It's hugely rewarding, isn't it?
Massive. And I think, one of the obligations you have in business, especially in a senior position, is that I always say that you have the responsibility to pass on the good practice, but you also have a responsibility not to pass on the bad. Yeah. You learn sometimes through poor line management that you've had previously, and everyone's had them, good and bad managers. Can you try and, as best your ability, take the good parts and then try and dissuade people from seeing those poor cultural pieces interject into what you do on a day-to-day basis? But yeah, the growth of people through the business, and to be able to not just, you look around at a Christmas party,
right,
and it's a moment of reflection, because not normally do you have everyone in one place. We're operating lots of venues on a 24-hour basis. It's very hard to get everyone together on that basis. And when we do, from a managerial perspective, and you see everyone from a head office team perspective that weren't there when you started, from all of the managers, from all these teams, everyone, not just myself, everyone gets to see their part in what has allowed that to take place. And that's something to get out of bed for in the morning as such.
And culture is such an important part of the progress of the business, and how people evolve and so on is such an important part of it. Yeah. You talked a little while back about 4 people crying in 1 week. how do you go about changing a culture in which people are coming and crying?
Well, I mean, that one was, I suppose, more simple than it sounds, actually, is that all of the intentions and the will was there. But what there was a disconnect in that business in terms of the way that they'd grown, and everyone was trying to live those values and be there, and they were working incredibly long hours and they were very dedicated. But that culture had existed very, very successfully for 1, 2, 3 locations. Because they had FaceTime, they had that role of that owner and the CEO in front of them. When you're removing yourself from that equation and then expecting other people to do exactly as you've done, as the culture has been based around you and you alone, there's a breakdown. And there was obviously a piece where people didn't want to come forward or feel that they were failing, or there was a lot to deal with. But at the same time, the basis was there. He cared implicitly, the story in terms of, shedding a tear over the fact that somebody was upset in terms of where they were or where his business was. It's not broken. It's just, there's just work to be done in terms of dealing with that. There was a great story when I realised that I think that the job had been done as such. We went from that moment of tears being shed and everyone being incredibly upset to... we had a handyman who had started. He'd only been with us 4 weeks. He'd taken time off immediately because his wife had a stroke. The CEO, unbeknownst to me, went to his house with a gift basket in his gym gear, didn't have a suit on, didn't announce himself, didn't say a word, took that gift basket, gave it to him. He was incredibly thankful, not knowing who the person was. He came back to work. We went for a coffee. We obviously did the return to work and everything else, and asked him if there's anything else he needed. And at the end of that, I said, the CEO would just like to have a quick chat. At which point he was getting worried. He thought he was going to be fired. He walked in the room, saw the guy that had given him the gift basket, and then he broke down in tears.
Okay.
It was one of those things that transition between a very highly emotional state in a negative way to seeing something quite beautiful in the fact that, and I think that allowed him to reconnect with how he had done it previously. And that, yes, he expected a lot from people, but you're not getting the CEO turn up and give you a gift basket on your door and see how your wife is doing personally, without even announcing who he was, just to see how, and that was a beautiful
TV
thing.
programme, The Secret Millionaire or something.
I hope he didn't steal it from somewhere, because now I'm going to be really upset with that story.
No. It's just something that, I've seen on TV and thought that it never happens in practice, but, it's lovely to hear.
It does. I mean, I think when you get so wrapped up in something that is intrinsically yours and a business that is your heart, your soul, and everything else you put into it, you do wander sometimes, and sometimes you need a little bit of something to be able to bring you back. But again, that was when I knew that the change had been made, and I was really, really fortunate to be a part of that. Really, really nice.
And so just looking at the two sides of your role then, Director of People and Strategy, what are the sort of strategic goals that you've got at the moment? What is it that you're working on in the coming year? Yeah,
so I think for us it's always trying to plan a year ahead. If you're going to grow to the scale that we are, I mean, we started off with, I think, 6 locations when I started just over 2 years ago. Now got just opened our 16th. And again, continuing on that model is you have to be so far ahead of where you are expected to be. But I'm very fortunate. We've got some great support in terms of the way that the business is founded, and the owner has founded multiple businesses before and he understands that, and it's incredibly nice to be in that supportive environment. We would have a head office function that's so overinflated in regards to what we need now that most people would reject that immediately, or that proposal of that. But understanding that you cannot get to where you need to be, because that growth is not to double in size. It's not double the work, it's 4 times the work, because you're trying to run existing businesses, make improvements, continue to grow, and then planning out ahead. So that biggest thing for me is I'm looking now at the people that are coming in at entry-level roles as hosts and going, when are they going to become a general manager? And we're starting to see that now, and it took some time, but we've seen, I think even last week we processed 2 promotions from supervisors to assistant managers and assistant managers to managers. That now shows that we're on the right path, and it makes that ability to facilitate that growth even more possible smoothly, because growth is always hard, it's always difficult, there's always challenges, but it's so much better if you know that you can pick up the phone and there's people. We launched a new venue last week and we brought 3 venue managers in from other venues. The fact that they could leave their venue in hands of people that can run it means a lot, but the fact that we could launch a venue in that way with those people that have done this 6-7 times now. Again, it wouldn't be possible otherwise. So that was something that I was planning 2 years ago to try and get to that point. So that's the biggest thing in terms of when we talk about people. Yes, we've launched learning and development academies and everything else, and that's been great, and something that I've never done before either. So I'd never really done anything in learning and development. And then 6 months later, use of AI. We've got AI avatars delivering our training presentations, and what could be from a technical standpoint, at least industry leading in regards to what we've done. As 20% of my time for 6 months, that wouldn't have been possible. And again, I know we've talked about it. I know you've talked about it a lot in terms of the podcast and AI in the workplace and everything else. But it's a massive benefit in that sense, because as I said, from that perspective, it looks cleaner than anything else that I've used from a learning and development platform, and it took a fraction of the time. So yeah, I'm really excited for that as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a split personality out there between people who are really embracing AI and seeing that actually it's something to help me supplement what I do rather than remove what I do. And then there's a whole host of people who are like, I don't know about these things. They're going to take over the world. It's we're going to have nobody in jobs. I was talking to somebody just yesterday about Abba Voyage. Have you seen Abba Voyage with the hologram people? And I said, how was it? Did you enjoy it? And she said, oh, it's so scary. It's not scary. What are you talking about? She said, but the scary thing for her was the idea that if they can stand there and sing and be Abba as a hologram, what else can they do? And where's that going to go to next? So there's definitely are you this side or that side of the line approach? Not
that I'm a massive ABBA fan or I'm going to dress up in some flared trousers, but there is some comparisons. Nobody needs that. There is some comparisons to that, weirdly, because when we talk about AI and using it for learning and development, the company that we use, Synthesia, I'm not trying to shamelessly plug them, it's just a very good service. They have a whole suite of AI avatars. So effectively you can have text to speech. So you type in whatever you want, and that avatar will present that information in your presentation, part of your learning development. We had a secondary problem because from a contractual standpoint, we weren't allowed to use the stock avatars in there. So the only way we could do it was by giving somebody's likeness to be replicated in it. Unfortunately, that was me.
I was going to say, I can almost feel where this is going, Darren.
Yeah,
goodness.
It's a little bit upsetting because I didn't realise how miserable I looked.
Oh no.
Yeah, so I keep getting comments from hosts because you're much nicer in person because you look really sad on the training. But
funny. Years ago, I did. I've done a bit of TV in my time. People asked me to come on and talk about various employment law things. And I remember the very first time I did, I was asked to talk about the Wrens going to sea, which was a huge thing, probably 25, 30 years ago. And I got asked to go on the local BBC. And so I then said to everybody, oh, you must watch it. And my mum watched it. And I said to her, I presented and I talked about all the technical legal stuff. And how did you think it went? And she said, oh, you do have a tendency to slouch. And that was all that she saw of me. So
I'm now sitting bolt upright.
Yeah, let's just readjust for the benefit of my mum, who's probably not watching this podcast, but there we go.
No, but I mean, with that, I think it was really, really interesting in terms of, doing that. And as I said, sort of being injected into AI immediately. And then you're in a position where, again, you've got your avatar, you've done this presentation learning, and also learning how that all works through ChatGPT and everything else. But I also... there is so much that it can't do. I've used it, was an early adopter, I use it all the time. But there are certain things, so for that learning and development, the only thing I could use ChatGPT for really was the health and safety module. That's it. Because everything else is so personalised to us from a compliance, from a license function, from safer gambling perspective and everything else. As even if you scrape the entire internet from ChatGPT, it cannot tailor it. And you make one word mistake in that, it will cripple you in terms of your training and everything else. So you can't replace that. And I don't think it could ever do that because you would have to inject all of your policies, procedures in it for it to understand what your business model is. But you have to write the policies and procedures first. So I don't think it will ever replace that. I just think there are a lot of administration tasks. And for someone like me, I have horrible spelling and grammar. So it's really, really helpful in that sense to be able to utilise something that doesn't change what you're saying in that sense because you can still understand the verbiage and everything else. But yeah, just to be able to use that on a daily basis is incredibly helpful. And
I think from our perspective within the law firm, taking away some of that routine, repetitive stuff and freeing people up to do the more inspirational legal stuff That's where I see AI coming as a benefit. It's going to help us in terms of the growth journey for these individuals. They're not sort of bogged down in the stuff that AI can be doing for them.
But it was really interesting because I went to a round table probably 18 months ago. And weirdly, there was a discussion on AI from the founder of Perkbox. And he was starting another company. But in one of those conversations was around Synthesia, was around learning and development AI avatars. And I was already using it. I was literally writing it as I was there. And I was amazed. I mean, there were some incredibly accomplished people in that room. And no one had really adopted it at that point. And that was shocking to me in that sense, that there was all these facilities and the availability of it. You can go on ChatGPT now and you can create artwork for your business in a blink of an eye for an $8.99 subscription or whatever it is. And the ability for that and to be able to do those things and to be able to create, and just to be able to articulate yourself and to be able to use that as a function, to be able to push the business forward or save you time or all those things, it isn't widely being used. Even now, everyone knows the names, but the functionality of what it can accomplish, it can write you script for your websites just from a text, and it's it's fascinating.
It is fascinating, and I think the challenge for business is going to be not to just replicate what we currently do through AI, speed things up and whatever, but actually to reinvent things and to, as you say, see what the opportunities are from what else AI can do for us. My career, it was not coming to an end, but I will be retiring in the not too distant future. When I look back, I talked before about my first week at Warner's, where there was some huge excitement because we got these new typewriters where there was a little screen. You could type a whole sentence before it went to the page, and that was revolutionary and so exciting. And obviously, over the 30 years I've been here, we're now, we don't have secretaries as such. We type all of our own stuff, and we have our own palm-held, whatever they are, our iPhones and all the devices and so on, and we can work remotely and all those things. And that's been an exciting journey, but I think looking to the future is even more exciting, and how AI is going to, where will the business be in 30 years' time? Because I think it's going to be a super exciting place if we can just embrace the AI. Yeah,
I think every generation has something that presents a challenge that if you don't keep up with it. So for my parents' generation, I'm only 36, so I was very fortunate. I think that I've probably hit the end of this wave in regards to this being the next milestone, probably from the internet, personally. To be in that, to still adopt that early, to be using things that were similar, so you're not a year, 2 years behind, is really fortunate. And I think it's just an organic way of going through life, is that you can't keep up with everything. But if you can, and you're fortunate enough to be in that kind of window, it's going to benefit us massively. And there will be those challenges in the future. We don't know what they are, but they will continue. And I think keeping up with that, it's very easy to think that something is a fad. I remember that one of the stories from my dad was great. I was using Google Speech when it first came out. I said, "Dad, look at this, it's amazing." And he said, gimmicks, it's a waste of time, never use it. Come in the house a year later, and he's sitting there going, "Google," and I'm just like, "Are you joking?" And he said, No, I love it, this is great, isn't it? Have I shown you this? And I went, "Dad, I had this conversation with you a year ago." And it's that kind of thing, is like, if you can embrace it to that degree, it will help you no end. And as I said, ChatGPT, all of the Synthesia, the AI generation, it's continually growing. I get updates on a weekly basis, and it's mind-blowing still, the things that are now possible. And
then there's going to be the whole army of people who are employed in the prompt writing and interpretation. There's a whole load of jobs that we don't know about yet that are going to come for working with AI, aren't they?
Massively. I mean, prompt writing is a skill in itself. Being able to get out of the system what you require, knowing what's even possible in the system. So not write me an essay on 1,000-word essay on this subject. Write me in the style of this person, and it will absolutely replicate it. I could ask it to give you a rundown of the NBA results from last night in the style of William Wordsworth. It will do it. It will absolutely do it.
I'm going to try that in a minute.
Honestly, it's fascinating. And there's some of the things that, again, once you start to unplug what's even remotely possible, because it's not an automatic response from you to say, "Oh, well, this is obvious." None of that's obvious. You have to kind of learn what the facilities are and to be able to manoeuvre it to your own liking and wording and things you should say, things you shouldn't. So yeah, it's an absolute skill in terms of prompt writing for AI.
So then I think, going back to some of the things you've talked about in terms of recruitment and so on, we need to be looking to be recruiting the people who are visionaries, don't we? The people who've got that creative imagination, never mind what they can do in terms of the day-to-day job, but who have we got within our business who can think about what could AI deliver for us? Because that's where your growth is going to happen and be facilitated.
Yeah. I mean, in my last job, I was it was very sort of, and this is when I talk about being vulnerable to the things you're not good at and allowing anyone and everyone to help you. I was in that role, again, still relatively young. There were two people I'm still very close with in marketing and then in business transformation. Both who were around 23, 24 years old, and absolute geniuses. I've never seen anything at that age with that level of capability and experience. And all of the systems I ended up learning to use for HRIS, everything was done from one of those colleagues. And she taught me more than probably anyone had in that time frame, in that window. When I came into this business, we redeveloped everything from scratch. We use an ATS called Harry, but it's everything from start to finish. So that has your job posting is through the website, interviews, swim lanes, channels, next stages, automation, contract generation is DocuSign, automatically sent out versus the information that was given in the offer letter, all the way through to scheduling, payroll is all sorted from the whole thing. You have to want to implement those things and to make those changes, and also learn as you go. I didn't realise that actually doing that, even for 130 employees at the time, was 21,500 fields of data manually entered. Yeah. So that was a hard 3 months.
It blows your mind, doesn't it? It's like thinking about Google Maps and the satellite view, and thinking someone's had to drive the entire world to photograph it, and you've got to put that hard graft in to be able to then deliver that amazing product.
But who comes up with that idea in a board meeting and says, this will be a return on investment. We'll get every single road mapped on a relatively regular basis every few years. And somebody went, that's fantastic. Yeah. And to see that, to be able to see where that gets to, planning 5-10 years out, that's the kind of stuff that will continue to revolutionise business and industry. Yeah. But it takes, it takes hardship, and it takes a bit of guts to do that.
And have you had that sort of support around the board table in your various HR positions? Because that's an interesting conversation with a lot of HR professionals, is the need to get buy-in from director level, and have you found that it's been something that's been supported in the businesses you worked in? Yeah,
I mean, I think for me it's been that biggest challenge, and then the biggest benefit that you see off the back of it. As I said, having scrutiny from opening up a standalone HR role in terms of what can be the benefit, even having this department, not people in the department. What is the benefit from this department? And then everybody buying into that, so you can grow your team to 3, 4, 5 people each time, and continue to grow, but you have to challenge that directly. And I think that's one of the things that, coming from an operational background, you can do, is because you understand that one of the usual departmental battles that you'll have, or juxtaposition you'll find in a business, is between operations and HR. Because HR is seen as preventing operations from doing what they need to do commercially, dragging you down, making you do things you don't want to do. And it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that's where I've only now hired people into this business from an operational capacity. I have one person currently doing a CIPD5. I have everyone else, but they've come from operational backgrounds. I'm not CIPD qualified in any capacity, which always shocks some people in terms of, even at this stage not doing it. But that's the biggest thing, is when you lead from an operational capacity, you understand what the concerns, the issues are. And if you have a team big enough to genuinely support rather than just audit, that's game-changing in my opinion. And it takes time, and it takes a bit of sacrifice to plan that out, to say this is what's going to happen. But when you have problems from staff members, and even from a welfare perspective, we had a welfare issue the other day. I've seen that person 3 times in 2 weeks, personally. I can't do that in a normal business in terms of that structure. And yes, you could probably get away with a welfare meeting with a nice set of notes taken, a nice outcome, an occupational health referral, but to me that doesn't fulfil the obligation that we have. And that's the surprise you get from people is actually one of the rewarding things. The thankfulness for people to say, you didn't come here to try and fire me. You've been incredibly supportive. Thank you, and that means a hell of a lot. But you can't do that without the scale of it. But that's, as you said, going back to your original question, that's hard to promise somebody in the future the benefit that you will see from that. And now we can, because there were probably 2 or 3 people intrinsic to this business that would have left in normal circumstances without those supports there. And now ownership, everyone can see that realistically part of that process was at least from what you would consider generic HR practices. But it's so important.
And we're doing a lot of work at the moment on the employment rights bill.
Yeah.
And as I say, it's a couple of years out from when things are going to actually hit and the real sort of precipice happens. But now is the time when you can convince businesses that they need to do stuff, they need to change stuff, culture needs to be changed, recruitment needs to be changed, whatever it might be. We tend to come from an approach of, you need to do this because it's going to be scary when you get there. Look at the law, it's coming, it's bad, the train's coming down the track, you're going to be, crash. But I don't think businesses or business owners, board level, I don't think they respond well to threats. I don't think they respond well to the fun police element of HR, do they?
No.
You've got to be getting buy-in on the basis of, actually, this is what's going to be the benefit for you. Never mind the employment rights bill. These are the benefits that the business is going to experience, and some of the things you're describing today are really much on that benefits list, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think it's something that you've touched on previously as well, is people are too risk averse. There's not a pragmatic approach to HR or employment law in general. And that's where I said, like, for you guys, peace of mind, the Warner Goodman touch to it is hugely helpful and beneficial. I've dealt with lots of different people over the years now. One large service provider, which I won't name, who we were under contract with when I first joined the business. And I remember doing something that was relatively generic and I knew how to do, but I rung and asked for the advice to test the system. The loophole, the hoops they managed or made you jump through just to achieve a basic outcome were ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And then you find out that's because they also act as your insurer, so they're only protecting their own interest with it, which is logical, it makes sense. But from a business perspective, with no experience in those areas, you're taking them at face value. You're going, this is what I have to do to be compliant. And then it's, isn't this a drain? Isn't this problematic? This is terrible. We haven't got the time for this. And that's where it comes down to, is you don't see the benefit because you're swamped under it. Where in reality, the great thing, again, from Warner Goodman's perspective, you'll always give us the risks, you'll always tell us what the possible outcomes are, you'll always give us best practice, but that decision is always up to us. And that, I think, in that way of working is liberating. And if we can translate that over to a HR perspective internally inside of a business in the same way, then the relationship is so much better. And I do see that because of experience previously, but also small things. We would ask managers to do things from a HR perspective in terms of processes, policies, procedures. I'm doing that from a position, I've done your job. I've been in this industry, I've done that job. I know what it takes. And therefore also explanation. I don't give them stuff that isn't required to do or doesn't have a material benefit, but you also are obligated to explain to them what the benefit is. Not do as you're told. Here is the benefit. And some people don't realise. I had a one-to-one with a manager the other day, and I was mapping out their growth and all the things they'd done and some of the scepticism they had early on and everything else. And then you start to unpick that. And now that person is now a bastion for the whole business and is then a mentor for other people.
They become your promoters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you do so in a pragmatic way where everybody understands that it has a material benefit or it's for the right reasons. And it sounds simple, but that's very, very difficult because, I said lots of third parties, lots of people inside industry and some people in HR are so risk averse because if this goes wrong, this is on me. But you can't quantify the benefit. And that's something that I think probably people fight with people in finance for quite a lot, is that something in HR is quite intangible in that sense. It has a clear benefit, but it's not going to give you an ROI on a line on your EBITDA. So that's one of the things for me that was always really, really important to focus on. And to relate it to the operational capacity, some of those reflections, I remember having a conversation. We'd installed lovely lobby areas in venues, temperature control, beautiful areas, smart, presentable, great, had loads of benefit. What on earth could you put on a business model to say what a lobby will bring you in a return on investment? You can't, right? But you're still spending the money because you know it has a benefit. So when I'm talking about this, it's the same.
It's the same.
Yeah, I can't give you that return on investment because it's a practical thing. And now the good thing is if somebody can give you the benefit of the doubt and they see it, then you begin to just replicate that. And that's where you start to grow your team, you know, your benefit, your impact on the business. But my only advice would be get the small win first. If you can prove proof of concept in terms of a positive outcome for something that otherwise would have gone wrong, then yeah, you might be in a very nice position with the right people, you know, running it to give you a great platform.
Darren, I think I could probably sit and talk with you about this all day, but our time is almost up. So just a couple of quick things before we finish. First of all, any other top tips? Any other words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience?
I don't think I'm probably old enough to give anyone words of wisdom. But the only thing I would say in terms of what we talked about for recruitment and finding the right position, I speak to so many candidates and people that have been in a position where they haven't found that thing and they doubt themselves and it doesn't seem to start going their way. I would always advise you, if you want to make a change and you believe that you should be doing something more or something different, always reach out. There will be somebody at some point willing to help you and give you that opportunity, and I've been grateful for the people that have done that in my career anyway.
Fabulous. Well, as our number one fan of the podcast, you know how it ends, don't you?
I do indeed. I shall read it and I shall not wait in silence when I received it.
So we have our audience sourced question, and the envelope is the question for you.
Thank you very much. This is always the unprecedented thing. Sorry. What would 10-year-old you think of you now, and what advice would you give him looking back? He'd probably say I was sort of old and sad and, you know, just really boring. I think, as I said before, I would still maintain that aspect is, it sounds very cheesy, it sounds very cliche, but if you know that you should be doing something different and you know that you want to be contributing more in a different way, find the avenue for that. It may take you some time, but somebody will give you that opportunity. And I can truly say now I'm in a great place where, you know, I'm thankful every day and I feel very rewarded in what I'm doing. So, yeah, chase it.
Brilliant. What a great note to end on. Thank you so much for your time, Darren.
Cheers.
And I hope you enjoy the episode when it comes out.
I'll do my best. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. I hope you found it insightful and empowering. To stay connected, why not hit the subscribe button? Or if you think your friends might be interested, why not rate us as a 5? To be first to know about upcoming episodes, follow us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram and LinkedIn, where you'll find us at Warner Goodman LLP, or follow us on YouTube, where our episodes are at Piece of Pod. Thank you again. Until next time.